Welcome to our YouTube channel and to a brand new location that I've never showed you before. The reason for the new location will probably become apparent during the next few weeks worth of videos. But putting that aside, let's get on with today's project, which is to construct a stone arch bridge for an O-scale client. You've met him before. He stabbed Frodo on Weathertop. Just kidding, I couldn't resist the Lord of the Rings reference there. But seriously though, you've met him before. I did some scenery work on his layout a couple of months ago. And then when it came to this bridge, he wasn't sure how to build it himself, so he asked me if I could take care of the project for him. Now, although this was a really interesting project, it wasn't without its difficulties. I did have a couple of false starts, and you may see the results of some of those in the background of some of the shots. So without further ado, let's get stuck right into the project. For this project, I have bought two kinds of expanded foam panels from Woodland Scenics. It's a whole box full because it's amazing how much material a mid-sized O-scale structure can consume. And there's two kinds of panels here. I have these stone abutment panels, and I have these flexible walls which are going to be for the inside of the arch. And then I'm just going to have to carve the curved bits from clay. Well, I had to take this project out into the garage and build a wooden frame for the arch. I couldn't get the clay to stick to the foam. I know it sticks well to wood. And what I've done here, I've built 4 formers and a frame. A trick I learned in my days in the joinery shop was using masking tape as clamps. Anything that's really difficult to clamp can often be held in place with tape. I've had this setting up for a couple of hours now. I'm just going to put sides on so that I've got something to attach the rest of the foam to. Well, I have now finished my wooden former. The main purpose of this is to mount these 4 ribs that will give some shape to the arch. And I'm using these panels here from Woodland Scenics. They look great. They're designed as flexible panels. They're really flexible in this direction, but this way, not so much. And unfortunately, they're not as well manufactured as they appear to be. There's a lot of variation in thickness. Anyway, to get around this problem, what I have done is scored at the back every 2 courses of stone with a knife, making it a lot easier to bend them in this direction. So once I've cut them to length, I can just mount them in there, and that will give me my arch. I've now cut the first 2 panels to length and hot glued them around the base of the arch, leaving a space in the middle. Now, 1 panel isn't quite enough to do this. I'm not sure whether I'm going to put 2 joints close together or whether I'm going to cut 2 panels evenly and put the joint right at the crest of the arch. I've cut a narrow, flexible offcut of foam to be a tight fit in here. That way I can get an accurate measurement of what I need, the total of these 2 panels. And if we look, we see that the bottom row of stones is significantly wider than all the others. So if I put a joint at the top, I can use that to take up any excess that is not a full multiple of the regular stones. I hope that makes sense. I'm not quite sure if I explained it very well. Well, after quite a lot of fighting, I did eventually get the arch lined properly. I think the finished result looks reasonable, although in all honesty, I cannot in good conscience recommend doing it this way. This particular product is simply not designed for lining arches. Well, I've started the next step by cutting the 2 halves of this front wall from one of these panels. Well, actually I need to use 2 different panels for this one. and then the offcuts to the other side, like that. And now I've made a template for my ring stones. This is done using my Third Planet software and then printed out on the computer. Had to do it in 2 halves because it was too big for one sheet, and I printed it out on thin card. I'm going to cut out the ring stones and then use this as a template to mark where I've got to trim this to allow me to wrap it with some clay. Now, with that bit cut out, I've got templates for both the inside and outside of the curve. So basically the way to do it is to put the inside curve template against the stonework that's already there, and then I can draw around it or trace around it. Well, I decided that the right way to do it was to glue these panels on first. That way they are firmly attached and they're not going to move while I mark them. Then I put the template on, carefully cut around the top edge with the knife, and then using my finger as a depth gauge, I sliced it around this way. So now I have a reveal, and to get the ring stones I will just roll out a sheet of Das clay, the right thickness, and then wrap it around this edge. Well, I got all the clay on roughly and allowed it to set up for a couple of days. I had a dehumidifier in here to speed up the process, and it's now nice and hard. It looks a real mess right now. If I turn it over, half an hour ago this side looked the same as the other. I've started the cleanup process. I've now got more or less the right overall shape. So far the only tool I've had to use on it is this rasp. I've still got to clean it up some more with some fine sandpaper to get all the big grooves out of it, and then it's just a simple case of carving in the individual stones. With the clay for the ring stones now carved to about the right shape, I'm just marking where the joints are going to be. Well, after a little bit of experimentation, I settled on using this scriber and a steel rule, or in this case a square, to get the side ones, and just scratching each one. And the 2 strokes was enough to give a good depth of mortar joint. They're not very visible at the moment. I've got to come back with the shop vac and vacuum off all the dust, because otherwise it fills the joint. Well, once I got past all the complexities and the difficulties in the ring stones, the rest of it went pretty quickly. As you can see, I've already added the 4 wing walls, and I've got the bottom sections that go on. I may have mentioned earlier that I had to build the bridge in 3 sections, because otherwise it will be impossible to install in the layout, because the roadbed is already in place. Now, I took the precaution with all these of scoring a single panel and then snapping it and making sure that I use the same piece that I cut off to go back on again. That way it's only a hairline gap and I don't have to worry about getting a decent fit. So once it's painted, the joint will be completely invisible. Anyway, now I've got to see if I can turn it over the right way without breaking it. So it was a little bit awkward to turn it over and get it on its legs, but there it is. This one angled wing wall is necessary because there is a turnout on the bridge. So it goes from 2 tracks at this side to 3 tracks at that side. For the capping stones, I've gone back to the Das clay again. And what I'm doing now, I'm using a piece of 2-inch water pipe to roll it out, a bit like making pastry. I put it on a piece of parchment paper so it doesn't stick, and I've got 2 strips of plywood the same thickness, so I know when to stop rolling and get it uniform. And they're not quite long enough, so I just have to make it work. And it doesn't matter about surface imperfections like this, because the bridge has supposedly been there for 100 years already, and there would be some cracking. So now I'm just going to get a straight edge. I'm just cutting it with a knife. It can be a dull blade. And this bit will get salvaged, used later. And now I'm just going to mark out the size of the stones that I figured I needed. Now this DAS clay will not stick to the foam by itself. The only glue I've found that works well on this foam is hot glue, and if I try pushing these still soft pieces of clay down to the hot glue, I'm going to distort them. So I've hot glued strips of brown paper to the tops of all the walls, and now I can just attach these with wood glue. Now to get rid of the burrs created by the knife, I'm just wetting my finger and then rubbing them down, because with weathering the edges would tend to get rounded off anyway. I'm just going to spread white glue on the brown paper. Start with this one. Well, all the capstones on both sides are now completed. All that remains to be done now is to build the handrails and then get it painted. But that will be a task for another day. I need to let this go hard so that I don't ruin it. Well, I've left the bridge overnight, and I don't know if you can see in this photograph, but the clay has shrunk just a little bit, opening up these gaps here, and I'm going to have to fill those with something. For the handrails, I found these cast stanchions. They are fairly accurate to the prototype, the Pennsylvania Railroad hairpin stanchions. They were quite expensive. The 5 packs that I bought cost me $65 including shipping. First thing I had to do was to open out all these holes with a drill. And then there's 2 different sizes of brass wire which thread through the holes. A slightly smaller one on the bottom and larger one on the top. Well, I've been gradually assembling one of the railings. It's nothing awkward, it's just a little bit fiddly, and there's a lot of it. Well, I have now assembled 2 long sets of handrails. Cleaned up all the solder joints somewhat, and they're ready to install. Well, almost ready to install. The one on the front, I still have to put a bend in it at this point. And I'm going to drill holes in the capping stones so that I can put the pegs in. If you look closely on the stanchions, there's 2 pegs in order to plant them with. And it'll be a lot stronger than if I just surface glue them. With both handrails now glued in place, all that remains to do is get the bridge painted. Although most of it is already about the right shade of grey, there's a lot of areas that aren't, so I'm just going to start by covering everything with a black wash, and then I'm going to work from there with successively lighter dry brushes. So let me just slap some black paint on it all over, and I'll get back to you when that's had time to dry. Well, I gave the bridge 2 washes last night. First a black wash and then a dark brown one. I used this apple barrel chocolate bar. I couldn't find my burnt umber. My workshop is in disarray because I'm packing to move. This one's a little bit redder than the burnt umber, but it's still okay. The idea of doing that is so that when I do the dry brush and the grey, there's a little bit of brown tone showing through, so it's not quite as stark or as cold. Anyway, all that remains to do now is to dry brush it 2 or 3 times with successively lighter greys. So let me go away, do that, and I'll be right back. Well, the bridge is now finished and all ready for shipping. I've painted the railings plain black. I haven't weathered them. One reason, I don't know how heavily the customer wants them weathered, and secondly, I will be back there in a few months anyway, so I can do it there. I know he's been waiting for this bridge for a couple of weeks. He really wants to get it installed, so I'm just going to ship it today. All I need now is a crate. If we look over here, here's a crate I made earlier while the paint was drying. Well, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that you found it useful. And I hope to see you again next week. So thanks for watching, and bye for now.